I asked him, how can you do something like this? And he said to me, oh, well, it's not really illegal. It's a gray area. This is a gray area because there's no regulation. There's actually no law that says binary options is illegal, so it's okay. My name is Simona Weinglass. I'm a reporter with the Times of Israel, and I cover white-collar crime and corruption. In 2015, I was approached by people who wanted to blow the whistle on some or other type of corruption. And one of these people was a guy named Dan, who told me he wanted to blow the lid on a multi-million-dollar fraud that was hiding in plain sight. We met at a cafe at Cafe Aroma in North Tel Aviv. What Dan told me was that all over Tel Aviv, Herzliya, and Ramat Gan, in some of the fanciest high-rent skyscrapers in the city, there was this underground scam industry carrying on in broad daylight. And what would happen, there were probably dozens, perhaps over 100 of these call centers. Young Israelis and also immigrants from foreign countries would sit inside these call centers, and they would call people all over the world and offer them investments in a product called binary options. And they would encourage people to invest more and more of their money. And then when these very skilled salespeople felt that they couldn't get any more money out of the investor, they would cut off contact with them. So I just called the police and I called the Justice Ministry and I said, do you know anything about this? Have you collected statistics about this? Have you studied the issue? And they said, no, we don't know anything about it and we haven't studied the issue. As a journalist, I was shocked that I was unable to find people in Israel, especially responsible people or people in law enforcement, people whose job is to enforce the law, who would actually understand that this was fraud, pure and simple, and who would do something about it. And to add insult to injury, we got a lot of legal threats from these companies, and the legal threats didn't come from some second-tier law firm. They came from the most prestigious, most expensive law firms in the country. And in addition to the legal threats, we also got threats of physical violence. I went to report one of these threats to the police, and I recall very distinctly that I walked into the police headquarters. I told him about this threat I had gotten by email, and he said, well, who told you to be a journalist? Just like my job is dangerous, your job is dangerous. In September 2017, the CEO of a binary options company called UCOM Communications, a woman by the name of Liel Baz, took a vacation in the United States, and as soon as she landed at JFK Airport, she was arrested by 2 FBI agents, and she was sentenced to 22 years in jail. And that sent shockwaves. And one of the reasons it shocked Israelis is because what Liel Baz was doing is something that hundreds of other people, if not thousands of other people in Israel were doing. They were doing exactly the same thing. And the idea that that would be punished with 22 years in prison just emphasized the extent to which our law enforcement does nothing and law enforcement in the United States sees things very differently. There is no legal loophole that allows theft and fraud. It was such a breath of fresh air because finally, after so many years of frustration, after so many years of a completely wishy-washy and impotent response from the Israeli police and prosecutors, someone was finally doing something, and these fraudsters were finally having to face up to what they had done. So far, the U.S. Justice Department has convicted 7 people who were involved in binary options activity, and they've indicted about 21. About 21 is Israelis total. In Israel, none have been indicted so far. There doesn't seem to be any force within Israeli society that will clean this up. You obviously have an industry now that commits internet fraud, and nobody has any idea how big it is. So the first thing I wish would happen in Israel is that someone in the government would actually study the issue and try to figure out how big the problem is. When law enforcement is very weak, and when you have prosecutors who aren't actually doing their job in prosecuting crimes, journalism is really the last line of defense. And I'm actually very proud of what we've done. because if we hadn't exposed this industry and if we hadn't exposed Israel's underground industry of internet fraud, it would have probably continued the way it's been going. So I'm very proud of what we've done.